Three things happened today that, taken together, tell you everything about where this conflict stands and where it is going. Iran shot down an American MQ-1 Predator drone over its territorial waters. Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel while its drones infiltrated communities in Shlomi and Liman, wounding soldiers who had to be evacuated by Black Hawk helicopter. And the Israeli army filmed itself at Beaufort Castle, a medieval fortress in southern Lebanon, presenting the footage as evidence of a significant military advance. Three events, three very different stories, and understanding the gap between what each of those events actually means and how each side is presenting them to its own population is the key to understanding both the current state of this conflict and what comes next. Let me start with the Predator drone because it is the most operationally significant of the three. The IRGC Air Defense Forces detected the drone the moment it entered Iranian territorial waters, targeted it with what they described as advanced defensive missiles, and destroyed it. A $4 to $5 million American surveillance asset gone in seconds. The IRGC issued a statement saying that Iranian territorial waters are under their complete control and any aggression will be met with firmness. Now I want to be careful here because the drone shoot-down raises a question that neither side has answered clearly. What was an MQ-1 doing entering Iranian territorial waters? The Predator is a surveillance and reconnaissance platform. Its presence in Iranian territorial waters means someone wanted eyes on something specific inside Iran. Missile sites, naval assets, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority's operational infrastructure, the underground tunnel systems where Iran hides its fast attack boats and missile launchers. The fact that Iran detected and destroyed it tells you two things simultaneously. Iran's air defense capability is more functional than American planners had hoped after the opening strikes of February 28th. And the United States is still conducting active intelligence gathering operations inside Iranian airspace, even while diplomatic negotiations are ongoing in Muscat and through Pakistani channels. Fighting and watching while talking. This is the reality of where this conflict is 90 days in. Now let me talk about Beaufort Castle, because I think this story is one of the most revealing pieces of information about the current state of Israeli military operations and Israeli public communications strategy that we have seen in weeks. The Israeli army captured Beaufort Castle, a medieval archaeological site in southern Lebanon, approximately 4 kilometers from the Israeli border. They filmed it, they announced it, they presented it as a significant military advance. Israeli media covered it widely. And the reality, which emerges when you read the actual reporting carefully, is that no fighting took place at the site. Hezbollah was not there. It was not a defensive position. It was not a military installation. It was an undefended medieval fortress that Israeli forces walked into and filmed themselves standing in. The capturing of an empty castle is not a military victory. It is a communications operation. It is a staged event designed to give the Israeli public an image of forward momentum, of territorial advance, of the war going somewhere at a moment when the actual operational picture, Hezbollah drones still reaching Shlomi and Liman, soldiers still being wounded, helicopters still evacuating casualties, tells a story of an adversary that has not been decisively degraded. The gap between the Beaufort Castle images and the Black Hawk helicopter evacuating wounded soldiers is the gap between Israeli public communications and Israeli operational reality in southern Lebanon right now. I want to spend significant time on the negotiation dynamics this week because I think the exchange of proposals and counter-proposals between Washington and Tehran reveals the deep structure of the disagreement in ways that the public statements from both sides obscure. Trump met with his aides for 2 hours and sent Iran a tougher counter-proposal. The New York Times reported the specifics clearly. No frozen assets handed over to Iran. No ceasefire in Lebanon as part of any deal. Iran must commit to transferring its enriched uranium. Trump described this as meant to speed things up and pressure Iran to accept. And in the same week, Trump told Fox News that he is in no hurry, that if you are in a hurry, you will not make a good deal, and that slowly but surely America is getting what it wants. These two statements represent genuinely different strategic logics being expressed simultaneously by the same president about the same negotiation. Pressure to accept and in no hurry are not compatible descriptions of the same approach. What they represent is the output of an internal administration debate between different factions with different views about how to handle Iran, with different statements reaching the public at different moments depending on which faction's view is dominant in any given conversation. The substance of Trump's counterproposal deserves careful analysis because each of its three elements reveals something important about the fundamental disagreement between the two sides. The refusal to hand over frozen Iranian assets is the most economically significant element. Iran has hundreds of billions of dollars in assets frozen in American-controlled financial institutions. These assets belong to Iran. They were accumulated through legitimate oil trade and frozen through unilateral American action. Iran's parliament speaker Kalibaf said explicitly this week that the criterion for Iran is objective achievements, not words and promises. From Iran's perspective, the return of frozen assets is the most concrete possible objective achievement America can offer. It is money that exists in specific accounts that can be transferred in a verified and visible way that Iran's negotiators can point to as proof that the agreement is real. Refusing to return those assets while asking Iran to make irreversible military concessions like transferring its enriched uranium is asking Iran to pay a permanent price in exchange for a promise. And Kalibaf told you exactly what Iran thinks of promises from America. No confidence. The refusal to include a Lebanon ceasefire in any deal is the second element, and it is strategically revealing in a different way. Hezbollah is Iran's most important regional partner. The fighting in Lebanon is directly connected to the broader conflict between Iran and the United States and Israel. Iran cannot sign an agreement that ends the war against Iran while its closest ally continues to be bombed in Lebanon. That is not a maximalist demand. That is a minimum condition for any agreement to be politically sustainable inside Iran. If Khamenei and the Iranian leadership sign a deal that stops the bombing of Iran while Lebanon continues to burn, the domestic political cost inside Iran would be enormous. The Iranian public, which has been told that the axis of resistance is fighting together against a common aggressor, would understand a Lebanon exclusion as Iran abandoning Hezbollah to save itself. That is not a deal that any Iranian leader can sell to the Iranian political system. The refusal to include Lebanon in the ceasefire framework therefore makes the overall agreement significantly harder to reach, not easier, regardless of how much it simplifies the diplomacy from Washington's perspective. The uranium transfer demand is the third element, and it is the hardest of the three. America wants Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% transferred out of the country. Iran has refused. Iran has offered to dilute it to lower levels under international supervision. And the question of where the uranium goes if it is transferred is itself a significant complication. Trump told Axios that he wants specifics about how America gets the material and the timing. The use of the phrase, "how America gets the material," is itself revealing. Not how the material is transferred to a neutral third country. Not how the IAEA takes custody of it. How America gets it. That framing suggests America wants physical possession of Iranian nuclear material, which is a demand that goes significantly beyond what the 2015 nuclear deal required, and that Iran would interpret as America taking its most strategically significant asset as a trophy of military victory, rather than as a non-proliferation measure. The distinction matters enormously for whether Iran can accept the demand politically. Let me now address what CNN reported this week, because I think it is one of the most important pieces of analytical information to emerge in this conflict, and it has received far less attention than it deserves. Sam Lair, a research associate at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, who analyzes Iran's missile capabilities, told CNN directly that if hostilities resume, Iran is in a position to continue launching missiles so long as it has launchers and crews, even if production has halted. He said, "There is nothing to prevent the launchers from being armed with the ample stockpile of missiles that the Iranians still have." I want you to absorb what that sentence means for the military options currently on the table in Washington. The Pentagon's target list of Iranian energy infrastructure is designed to raise the economic cost of continued resistance to a level that Iran cannot sustain. It is not designed to eliminate Iran's ability to strike American forces and American allies, because that ability, based on the existing stockpile of missiles already manufactured and already distributed to already operational launch sites that are already underground and already hardened against airstrikes, cannot be eliminated by the strikes that are currently being considered. You can bomb Iranian oil refineries. You can hit Iranian gas processing plants. You can destroy Iranian petrochemical facilities. And Iran will still have missiles. Iran will still have launchers. Iran will still have crews. And those missiles will still fly toward American bases in Kuwait and American warships in the Gulf. And Hezbollah will still fire drones into Shlomi and Liman. The military option that is being held over Iran's head as leverage in the negotiations cannot achieve the military objective that would actually change Iran's negotiating position. Iran restarted its South Pars gas platforms this week. This is the facility that supplies more than 70% of Iran's natural gas, the backbone of Iranian energy and petrochemical production. Israeli attacks on February 28th damaged the gas processing facilities along the Bushehr coast and halted production. Iran's engineers have now repaired enough of the infrastructure to restore output, rerouting gas flows to other processing plants while the Phase 14 refinery continues its repairs. The significance of this restart goes beyond the immediate economic benefit to Iran. It tells you something about Iranian technical and organizational capacity that Western analysts have consistently underestimated. Iran repaired critical energy infrastructure under sanctions, without access to Western technology, without Western supply chain support, in 3 months, while simultaneously managing a war, rebuilding military command structures, conducting negotiations through multiple channels, and shooting down American surveillance drones. That combination of capabilities is not what a country on the verge of submission looks like. That is what a country looks like when it has decades of experience solving difficult problems with domestically available resources and domestically trained expertise. The IRGC unveiled a new fast attack boat at a public gathering in Tehran's Engelab Square this week. The vessel is equipped to launch 2 sea-based cruise missiles with a 700-kilometer range and can operate in waves up to 3 meters high. Iran's doctrine is to hide these boats in underground coastal tunnels between operations, making them nearly impossible to target from the air. The 700-kilometer range is significant because it extends Iran's naval strike capability well beyond the Strait of Hormuz into the broader Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and significant portions of the Arabian Sea. Any American naval vessel operating anywhere in that geographic area is potentially within range of weapons that Iran can fire, return to a tunnel, and fire again before the responding strike reaches the launch site. The public unveiling of this weapon during ongoing negotiations is itself a strategic communication. Iran is saying the pressure campaign is not degrading our military capability. We are adding to it. If America wants a military solution, the military solution gets more expensive every week. The American Air Force tanker spotted landing in the United Kingdom with shrapnel holes deserves more analysis than it has received. A tanker aircraft operating in support of operations somewhere in West Asia returned to Britain with physical damage visible on its fuselage. Shrapnel holes mean a weapon detonated close enough to that aircraft to penetrate its metal skin. Tanker aircraft operate at high altitude and at significant distances from their supported aircraft. For a tanker to sustain shrapnel damage, something got very close to it in an environment where something getting close should not have been possible. The American military has not commented on this incident. The damage was noticed because a civilian or journalist spotted the aircraft on the ground and photographed it. which raises the obvious question of what other damage American military assets have sustained in this conflict that has not been visible to civilian observers and has therefore not been reported. The official American narrative of this conflict has been one of overwhelming American military superiority and Iranian degradation. The physical evidence that emerges when you look at what you can actually see, shrapnel holes in tankers, emergency landings by F-35s, a drone shot down, mines in the Strait, ships being boarded, tells a story that is meaningfully different from the official narrative. Now, I want to step back from the individual events of this week and give you my honest assessment of the structural situation and where I believe this conflict is heading over the next 30 to 60 days. Because I think the immediate news cycle, the drone shoot down and the Beaufort Castle images, and the counterproposal, and the South Pars restart, while each important in its own right, can obscure the deeper trajectory if you only look at each piece in isolation. The fundamental structural reality of this conflict is that both sides have reached the limits of what military pressure can achieve without crossing thresholds that neither side currently wants to cross. America cannot silence Iran's missile capability with available air power, as the 90% operational missile site assessment and the SAM layer analysis both confirm. Iran cannot force a political resolution through military pressure alone because American domestic politics gives Trump enormous space to absorb military costs and continue the confrontation indefinitely. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for 90 days. The global economy is absorbing the pain. The pain is significant, but not yet catastrophic enough to force a resolution on either side's terms. This is a strategic stalemate. And strategic stalemates are resolved either through escalation that changes the fundamental balance of costs, or through negotiation that finds a framework both sides can accept without either side having to publicly acknowledge that it did not get everything it wanted. I want to make specific predictions about what I believe will happen in the next 30 to 60 days, because I think the situation is now structured enough that the likely pathways are more visible than they have been at any previous point in this conflict. Iran will respond to Trump's counterproposal within 3 days, as it indicated. That response will not accept the American demand to transfer enriched uranium without something concrete in return. But it will contain new language on the uranium question that is designed to keep the conversation moving. Iran will propose a sequence arrangement where uranium management happens in verified steps alongside sanctions relief, with each step contingent on the other side completing its corresponding step. This is the only architecture that Calibat's criterion of objective achievements can accommodate. It is also the only architecture that has worked historically in arms control agreements between adversaries who do not trust each other. America will read Iran's response and find it insufficient, but not a rejection. The talks will continue. In Lebanon, the situation will continue to deteriorate despite the ceasefire label. Israeli forces will continue operations in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah will continue drone and rocket attacks. The assassination attempts, which have all failed, will either be abandoned or escalated to tactics that carry higher civilian casualty risks and therefore higher international diplomatic costs for Israel. The Knesset dissolution vote, which passed at 110-0, signals that Israeli domestic politics is moving toward an election that will reshape Israel's strategic choices. An election campaign in Israel during an active multi-front war will produce political pressures on every party to take harder positions than the situation actually requires, making compromise more difficult at exactly the moment when compromise is most needed. The American AUKUS submarine deal revision, which reduced Australia's allocation from a mix of new and used vessels to only used Virginia-class submarines, and extended the timeline to at least 15 years, tells you something important about American industrial and military capacity that is directly relevant to the Iran confrontation. America is revising its submarine commitments to a major ally because it does not have enough shipbuilding capacity to meet existing demand. A military that cannot build enough submarines to fulfill its alliance commitments is a military operating under real resource constraints that affect its ability to sustain indefinite, high-tempo operations across multiple theaters simultaneously. The Iran war, the Taiwan deterrence mission, the NATO commitments, the Pacific presence, the submarine commitments to Australia, all of these are drawing on the same pool of American military industrial capacity, and that capacity is finite. China is watching all of this very carefully from Beijing. The Trump-Xi meeting produced no publicly announced breakthrough on Iran. China has continued buying Iranian oil. China has maintained its economic relationship with Iran through the war. China vetoed the UN Security Council resolution. And China is simultaneously deepening its relationship with Russia through the Cross Years of Cooperation initiative that Xi and Putin launched this week. The strategic alignment between China and Russia, not a formal alliance, but a deep and institutionalized partnership, is the background condition against which every American foreign policy decision in this conflict is being made. The United States is not managing a simple bilateral confrontation with Iran. It is managing a confrontation with Iran that is embedded in a broader great power competition in which the two countries with the most leverage over Iran, China and Russia, both have strategic reasons to want America's position in this conflict to be costly and difficult. The Hormuz situation will resolve eventually. My assessment is that the resolution will come through a framework agreement that is deliberately ambiguous on the question of who controls the strait, allowing both sides to claim their position has been preserved. Iran will maintain the Persian Gulf Strait Authority as an institution, but the practical management of shipping will be conducted through a coordination mechanism that allows commercial vessels to transit without formally acknowledging Iranian sovereignty over the waterway. America would describe this as a strait being open under international norms. Iran would describe this as the PGSA framework being implemented. Both descriptions will be simultaneously true and simultaneously incomplete. This kind of deliberate ambiguity in the framing of a resolution, where each side tells its own public a version of events that its public can accept, is how almost every major geopolitical confrontation of the last century has been resolved. It is not elegant. It is not satisfying to analysts who want clarity, but it is how the world actually works when two powerful parties need to step back from a confrontation without either one admitting that it did not fully achieve its objectives. The nuclear question will take longer and will remain the most dangerous element of this crisis for the foreseeable future. No framework agreement on the strait will fully resolve the underlying tension about Iran's nuclear capability. The enriched uranium stockpile will be managed through some form of IAEA supervised arrangement that neither fully transfers the material to American custody nor leaves it in Iranian hands without verification. The 20-year enrichment freeze that America wants will become something shorter with different language. The permanent end to weapons capability that Israel wants will become a set of verification measures and commitments that can be monitored, but can also be reversed if the political situation changes. This is unsatisfying. It does not eliminate the risk, but it is the achievable outcome given the current balance of forces and the current political constraints on both sides. What I am most concerned about as I look at the next 60 days is not the scenario that everyone is talking about, which is a resumed major American military campaign against Iranian energy infrastructure. I am more concerned about the scenario that nobody is planning for, which is an accident, an incident, a miscommunication in the dark waters of the Strait of Hormuz between a fast attack boat and a destroyer. A drone that gets through to a target it was not intended to reach. A missile that malfunctions and lands in the wrong country. The Beaufort Castle story tells you that Israel is conducting staged communications operations, which means its actual military operations are producing results that require management. The Hezbollah drones in Shlomi and Liman and the wounded soldiers evacuated by Black Hawk helicopter tell you that the human cost on the Israeli side is real and accumulating. Accumulating human cost creates political pressure for action. Pressure for action in an environment of staged communications and military stalemate creates exactly the conditions in which leaders make decisions that they would not make if they had more time and more information. That is the scenario I am watching most carefully. Not the planned escalation, the unplanned one. The one that nobody chose and that everybody then has to manage in real time without preparation in the worst possible political environment. The self-PARS gas platforms are flowing again. The Predator drone is at the bottom of the sea. The Beaufort Castle is empty. The tougher counterproposal is in Tehran. And somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, an American tanker is sitting at anchor, waiting for conditions that allow it to transit safely. That tanker, and the hundreds of others like it, are the most honest measure of where this conflict stands. They are waiting for a resolution that both sides say they want, that neither side has yet been willing to pay the full price to achieve, and that the people making the decisions on both sides keep deferring to the next proposal, the next counter-proposal, the next 3-day response window. The clock is running. The missiles are still in the launchers, and the resolution, when it comes, will look like the inevitable outcome of 90 days of conflict only in retrospect. In the moment, it will feel like the hardest possible thing either side has ever agreed to. And it will be. That is what ending a war always feels like. And it is coming. The only question that remains open is whether it comes before the accident or after it.